really this is about how to get people to play differently or do what you want them to do in raids. Sometimes it's going to be do more DPS, might be getting people to sunder more, or things like hunter pulls, getting off tanks to do stuff the way you want. I think a lot of people approach this kind of stuff in ways that are very, very ineffective. Things that I'll see in tons of raid groups that I've been in over time is focusing on really tiny stuff that is hard to actually act on in the moment for somebody, or focusing on things that are really just downstream of generic skill. So, for example, if you try to tell somebody that they're not doing a good job as melee DPS and you're like, I want you to do more DPS. Hey, it's really bad advice. You're basically telling them just to play better. But a similar thing to that would be saying, well, you should just have higher uptime. Now, you should bring that up if somebody hasn't heard the term before, but telling somebody to have higher uptime, if they are already motivated to do well, it doesn't really work. But there's kind of like hacks that can help somebody get higher uptime. For example, if I thought somebody had low uptime, I probably wouldn't tell them have higher uptime. I would instead ask them things like, are you worried about pulling threat? Are you consistently not able to intercept to mobs and you see that other people are able to intercept or charge into mobs? I would ask them why they think their uptime is a bit lower, because quite likely they have a reason for it. It's not to say that it's a reason that completely absolves them of whatever statistics they're generating on Warcraft logs, but most people who really care about doing the best that they can in a raid group, and that's probably in a guild that has a really functional social environment and where people care about the raids, that's going to be most of the people in your raid. And if you pull someone off to the side and you ask them why they think they have less uptime than other people, they're probably going to tell you things that you can actually start tackling. If someone says, I'm worried about my threat, you could, for example, try to tell them which mobs that if they pull threat on, it just doesn't matter anyways. So maybe an example of that is, imagine you have a warrior DPS in your raid group and they say they're worried about pulling threat and you were doing something like Molten Core. Well, you could tell them this as an example. Anything that is an elemental in Molten Core, you don't really have to worry if you pull threat on. Now, why would this be something you could tell somebody and it wouldn't just be the end of the world? Now, I want to make clear that the giants, they're giants. If you pull threat on one of those, it'll probably kill you. But if you pull threat on an annihilator, oh, it happens all the time. They do a threat reset. Obviously, you don't have to worry about it. What about the Fire Lords, the guys who put the stacking fire vulnerability debuff on whoever they're hitting, and they are all over the dungeon? Like them, they don't auto attack all that hard. They do a ability that puts a dot on someone, but it's really just not a big deal. If somebody pulls threat on them, it's fine. Same thing with Surgers, or when you're doing a lava pack, as long as you're killing the tiny lava elemental first that does Fire Blossom, if somebody pulls threat on that mob, it's really not a huge deal, and it's very unlikely it's going to kill them. And they don't really have a chance of pulling threat on pretty much anything that isn't the skull target, unless your tanks are incredibly unlucky or playing bad. So perhaps you could tell this to somebody in your raid, and then in Molten Core, they can actually believe it and act on it. Because if they legitimately are scared about pulling threat and causing problems for the raid, and you explain to them how literally it doesn't matter as long as it's not a giant, because a giant will kill them or a dog will kill them, you can probably actually get them to change their behavior. If they are actually making active decisions to lower their uptime and now they have different information they're acting on, it wouldn't be that bad. Or, for example, in BWL, the same deal. Depending on the way you mark your kill order for trash and which trash mobs you're talking about, you could potentially tell somebody, hey, you do not have to worry about threat on any of the packs that don't involve the giant alligator people. And that would, I think, in general be true for BWL. I mean, like, what are you going to do? Pull threat on one of the warlocks? Maybe you do that and you cause the mobs to be a little bit out of position. That's a potential thing that could be a problem. If you kill instead the blood elves that are immune to magic first, then, for example, you really wouldn't have to worry about people pulling threat. The blood elves are a melee mob, so they're very easy to position, and somebody would end up pulling threat while the mob's already positioned. So that's an example of ways you can actually go about getting people to do better. Now, another one that I see all the time in raids that I think is really goofy, and I've talked about this before, is really harping on Sunder armors. I do think there are a lot of raid groups that are terrible about Sunder, and it is something that matters, but it gets a whole lot of attention, and I think people start trying to pad it in raid groups too, in ways that aren't really all that productive. Like, for example, if you're doing some 6, 7, 8 mob fucking trash packs in the later raids, not the ones that exist in Anniversary right now, but in the later raids there are packs like that. It's truly not all that important, especially on a pack very early on, that people sunder their off targets, because you're probably the mobs are gonna catch like 20 sappers, and you're gonna have like 4 mages, and a lot of the damage isn't even gonna be physical because of this stuff that's hitting, the 6th mob that you kill in a trash pack. So is it really worth your focus to have somebody actively thinking about how they need to do more of that to impress you in a raid? I think quite often it really isn't. Whereas, let's say you're in a raid group and sunders are a problem. Well, what should you do? Like Jake's saying, don't just like post everybody's sunders with like RPB, CLA, and then be like, oh, let's look at the bottom third of the guys and put a lot of focus on them. I think you get almost all the value just by making sure that off tanks are assigned on the mobs, and that the off tanks understand that getting sunder up rapidly is really important. So maybe what you should do is have a single off tank that's responsible for doing demo, or make a DPS do demo on the trash. And you could do the same thing with Thunderclap if you think Thunderclap is important to your raid group, and then have all the other off tanks, they just give them the instruction, hey, only hit Sunder until there's 5 Sunders on your mob, unless you think it's a mob that losing threat on is a big deal. And you could go to all your off tanks and you could tell them, if it's this mob, Bloodthirst first, otherwise it's Sunder for like until 5 stacks. And if you did that with 3 or 4 off tanks, you'd probably capture about 80% of the value of getting everybody to be really good at Sunder in your raid. And it also doesn't have to be in a way where you want to give the feedback after they mess up, because I think that can like create some animosity and just like weird vibes of people in the game. It's not like you should be afraid of telling people to change their gameplay, but it is a hard balancing act, I think, to make people know what you want from them in a way that makes them feel respected, and also that they can actually act on. I also think this is an issue with stuff like mage tanks and hunter pullers. It's and mind controlling on Vesuvius as well. These are all very, in my opinion, stressful positions where when it's done right, it will often be seen as invisible. And when it's done wrong, it's super obvious. Like if a priest messes up on Vesuvius, you just have a ton of people lose their world buffs. But Vesuvius is actually really annoying as a priest, even though it appears really simple. And pulling on a hunter, similar things, I think, like as a raid leader, when I have a hunter that I want to pull, I think you should almost never like criticize them in the moment, because the ideal pull hunter is like pretty brave, and I don't think you want to get in the way of that. So when you give people critique in the middle of a raid about how they're doing something wrong, now you can tell somebody how they're doing something right, I think that's fine, or like you want more of something, or you can be like, hey, like get the next pack like a little earlier, like that's fine. But if you're like, hey, I think that you pulled too slow those last 4 packs, like make sure you do that better next time. If you say some shit like that, I don't think it's really gonna help a whole lot. It's just going to change what that player has their focus on in the moment, rather than actually being a place to learn, which goes to a bigger idea of trying to get people to play better, and that is that raid really isn't, you as the raid leader, raid isn't really the place for you to make your raiders play better. Quite often there are things where literally being in the raid gives you a ton of extra ability to teach somebody. That does exist. Like you can be like, this mob, like this is the one that I like doing. You're a raid leader, you know which mobs have AoE, and you kind of understand what the cadence of taking the AoE is. And so perhaps you recognize that most of the raid is about to lose half their health, but everybody's full health. And so you can tell people, hey, we're about to like lose half our health, but it's no big deal, because the ability that does that damage has a huge CD. That's something that could help, and it can help people learn. And then, perhaps in the future, they'll remember this, and then they'll be less likely to panic and do lower DPS once their health gets lowered from that exact same event in some future raid. But it's very unlikely, for example, I think, if you're in a raid and you see, and this is a common one, the melee DPS in your group are spread out, and they're not following the raid leader, and they're running ahead of the raid leader, shit like that. If you bring this up a lot in raid while it's happening, I don't think it actually really contributes to having it happen less all that much. You'd be much better off like thinking of who the few people are that cause a legitimate problem by getting ahead of you and DMing them, and thinking really hard about how you're going to get them to like buy in on the idea and change their performance, and like really think about it. Which means you got to be invested with the like in the people that you're playing with. Otherwise, any of these ideas don't work. Like, I mean, that's another potential problem. Is it's a lot easier on the raid leader's time, leadership figures' time, just anyone who feels empowered to give public critique when they can do it publicly, because they can broadcast their ideas to everybody all at once. And there's also I feel like when you decide to do things really publicly, you also kind of forgive yourself for some of the inaccuracies you're going to have in your speech. Like, it's really easy to talk to your raid group at large, and ask them to do something better without like respecting any context. But when you're talking to an individual, it's much harder, I think, to allow yourself to get away with that. I find it just super fascinating whenever I'm in like a raid group, just seeing how people like interact with each other and how people try to get better. And I used to try to give people lots of feedback actually when I first got into raid leading stuff and guild leading stuff, and I kind of thought that would really work. And nowadays I give people, I think, way less feedback than average, or well, for somebody who takes their group seriously, at least. I give people some, so I mean, it's probably still more than average. Probably most people just don't have any feedback for the people that they play with. But it's like that. If you've ever seen the meme, it's like the bell curve, and there's the really smart guy on the right, and there's the dumb guy on the left, and they're both saying like, I press buttons, and the guy on the top like talking about all these fucking fancy little flashy things you can do to be better. I feel like a lot of playing the game and working with people it's kind of like that. Somebody will, for example, ask me how they think they could do more DPS in a raid, and I'll tell them, well, probably more uptime is the thing that would make you do more DPS. So like focus on things that get in the way of your uptime. Or the other ones are going to be, are you heroic striking when you could be cleaving? Do you have as many death wishes as the other players? And then buffs and consumes, that's just assumed that people are going to have that, at least the people that I end up playing with. But I used to like to do things such as dive into someone's logs and going to the events panel and the cast panel, and you can see what somebody's doing second by second on a fight, and then try to tell them, oh, you did a bloodthirst every 8 seconds instead of every 6. If you focus on that, you'll do a lot more DPS. And I actually don't think that's all that bad of a piece of feedback to give, but then other people will try to take it to extremes that I think are goofy. And they'll say things that aren't based in any data and are probably hard for somebody to do. For example, trying to tell somebody, well, make sure that you use your whirlwind better. You don't want your whirlwind to get in the way of bloodthirst. And you want to use your whirlwind with higher priority than heroic strike, because it swings your weapon basically the same as heroic strike. However, it doesn't cost rage to it doesn't like reduce your ability to generate rage, since you just swing your weapon, it's not attached to your auto attack at all. But when you give people feedback like that and you're trying to optimize like how can we get more single target whirlwinds off on bosses, you're really pretty lost at this point, in my opinion, if you're going down exploring optimizations like that. 'Cause if you just go and throw that idea into the sim, you're gonna see, oh man, like if I get this guy to do it perfectly compared to just taking whirlwind off the bar, I'm gonna make him do like 1% more DPS. And so then all of a sudden it really brings into question, are you actually helping at all when you try to direct people's focus and it's not just on the highest impact things? Because people got limited things they give a fuck about, and they also got limited things that, like, even if they do have infinite fucks to give, that they're going to be able to really keep in their mind. So I don't know. I rambled a whole bunch on this, but it's like if you're a warlock, get your curses up fast. If you do that and you AFK on every other part of the raid, whatever, you're an awesome player. You got the curses up. Druids, fairy fires, rogues. Why the fuck are you in a raid group? Damn it. You should have played a warrior. But if that MPA is good, I guess you can pretty much be AFK everywhere else. And there's lots of classes like that. Then you get all the way to shit like healers. Like, hey. If the things that need to get dispelled in raid are dispelled at the correct time, which is normally fucking immediately, and people aren't dying in the same ways all the time, probably feels pretty good. And warriors, have a lot of uptime, use your bloodthirst, use your cleave, use your CDs, and there's not much else to it. And I don't know. I wonder over time, like 4 years from now, what kind of goofy tools will we have to analyze our logs, and what will be the new flavor of the month things for people to look into? I bet that if RPB, CLA, if that shit never got popular, that people would care way less about Sunders today. Maybe eventually somebody will make a tool that what it can measure is the amount of damage lost on mobs in your raid because not all the debuffs were up. If that shit gets fucking invented, oh man, I think you're going to see people harping on those numbers without any thought 24/7. Thanks for watching.